Welcome, Immortalites, to another conversation. Today I have a self-titled, shadowy supercoder, also got a PhD in physics. It's the Mr. Brian of London. Welcome to the show, Brian.
Though of course, I can use my no agenda title. I am Sir Brian.
Sir Brian. Sir Brian as well. Sir Dr.
Sir
Brian
Doctor.
of London.
Doctor.
I always like to start off with something a little bit random. And one thing that I've noticed with you, and I've also noticed with a bunch of the Israelis in particular I've met, so not Jewish people, but Israelis in particular, that they seem to have a devil may care attitude in some respects. And so I wonder, does that come from living in so close to, like, I don't know, what it'd be like Jordan, Lebanon, Palestine,
Syria,
obviously, Egypt. Yeah.
They've all attacked us.
Does that come from just having so many people surrounding you? Like, is that?
Yes. Okay. Andy Grove, the founder of Intel, entitled his autobiography. I think it was an autobiography. He entitled it "Only the Paranoid Survive." And I actually think that the only example of actual natural selection working on humans in the last 500 years is Jewish people and paranoia. Now, most of it, a lot of Israelis can't come from Middle East and North Africa, but they also were persecuted and oppressed across the Arab world for 1,000 years. And this thing of breeding in paranoia, yes. But then how does that flip side? I think once you're both paranoid, but you also start to feel a little bit confident in your ability to defend yourselves, you go, you know what, let's just live. We'll live now. We don't know when the next siren is going off. And I'm sitting in my bomb shelter in the sky in Tel Aviv, because this room that I'm in has got just this window that's putting the light in. Part of the, it's got a glass part, it's got a sort of a cosmetic shutter thing for just blocking out sunlight, but then it's also got a 1.5 centimeter thick steel shell, which I can slide across, but it's usually rusted up. And like when tensions start to rise, like one of the jobs I have to do is go and spray it with WD-40 and oil and just sort of slam it backwards and forwards so that it's easy to move in a and then you slide it shut and bolt it. And this room is in the core of the building. So the way the building is designed, it's like a 9-story residential. It's not a tall tower, but there are 4 apartments on the floor, and each one in the central core where the lifts are, each apartment has got its own safe room. Now, if this building gets a direct hit from a Russian Grad rocket, the kind that they're throwing at Ukraine, if the building gets a direct hit, and this has happened, and we're all in the room with the steel doors shut, and then buildings have been like, you look at them and they're just like, oh my God, what the hell happened? But if the people were in the safe rooms, they're usually safe.
Yeah.
That's a direct hit. So yeah,
that's wild. I mean, yeah, I've always only seen like safe rooms and things like that in movies. So having it in your own house is is something quite different. The reason I brought that up was whilst traveling through Latin America, the only other people that I'd really meet everywhere was you'd get quite a few Germans, and the British were relatively spread out as well. But the amount of Israelis I would meet in like a random tiny town in Mendoza, Argentina, or San Juan or something was incredible. There was this attitude,
and all across the Himalayas as well.
Live for the moment.
Trekking, Nepal.
Yeah.
After the art, that's a tradition here. Look, I didn't grow up Israeli. I moved here 11, 12 years ago. And I was too late for the army. I got here, I was 39, and they didn't want me. Because you do reserve duty up until you're 40 usually, unless your job is particularly important, and then they might keep you longer. But after the army, all the kids, that's what the kids do. They all go off traveling, and they go everywhere. And you're right, they've just come out of 2 for the girls, 3 for the boys. They've come out 3 years of sometimes active training, guns and all of that stuff. They feel invincible. They've survived the Israeli army and the Israeli army training and the food and the bases and marching through the Negev desert. Yeah, so South America, how bad can that be?
Yeah, for sure. That's so funny because we have the same culture of whilst young, going out pretty early. You call it a gap year here in Australia, but there's no toughness born from, maybe I guess from like the Australian environment. Just if you've lived through snakes and spiders and stuff, you can have that same attitude.
Listen, I think it's actually a part of Israeli culture and society that we're having to think about right now, because Israel went through an incredible change that people don't grasp. When the Berlin Wall fell in 1989 and Russia opened up and Soviet Jews were allowed to leave, what happened was, at that time, Israel's population I haven't even looked this up or prepared for it, but it was something around 4.5 or 5 million people, including 800,000 or up to 1 million Arabs. Okay, that was the population of Israel pre the Soviet influx. In 10 years, more than 1 million Russians came into that. So that's like a 20% increase in your population by immigration of people with another, they were Jews, most of them, but they were another type of Jew. And we went through an incredible cultural changes. And we grew our population more than any Western nation has ever done by immigration. This is totally unknown. Okay. But they came here to be Jewish. And an experience I had when I first got here it was the year after I got here. There was a Davis Cup tennis match between Russia and Israel. And it was played in the big basketball arena where Maccabi Tel Aviv, and basketball's like one of the best, it's one of the only sports that Israel is internationally frequently on the top. I mean, we win the European championships, or have won the European championships many times. So it's this tennis match, and the crowd is full of Russian Jews who came from Russia and speak Russian, but they're supporting Israel. And this was something that back in England in the 80s, a politician called Norman Tebbit had remarked about what happens at the cricket in Birmingham when Pakistan or India are playing. Which side of is the crowd cheering for? He called it the Tebbit test, and there was all sorts of racist overtones and so on. But to me, it was a steady mark that when people came to Israel, even if they spoke Russian or their parents had been Russian, they grew up here, they were Hebrew speakers now, and they were supporting Israel against Russia. And they were there because it was interesting. We managed to put, there is an Israeli culture, and you separated it. It's different. It's not Jewish. It is Jewish. There's an Israeli Jewish culture, but Jews are not all Israelis. That's for sure. Israelis is something different.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I'd definitely need to go there someday when it's COVID and hysteria and war is not on the horizon. One of the things I wanted to start off chatting with you about was you sent me a boostergram not too long ago about decentralization, and that was actually what finally prompted me to get you on, because we've been talking about this for a little while. And it was definitely one of those episodes where I felt I was probably speaking out of my ass a little bit more than usual. And so it'd be good to get someone who's actually worked with, blockchains and has thought about this a lot more deeply than I have, for sure. One of the things I wanted to ask you, like straight off the bat, and this is a question that seems to keep popping up, is decentralization a black or white thing, or is it more of a spectrum? Like, do you look at it as binary, or it's tending one way or another?
It's definitely on the spectrum. It's absolutely a spectrum, because I'm going to try and avoid deep technical, because
please don't.
we need to understand what's gone on. And I put out a piece which a friend of mine, I'll tell the story about the court case later, maybe. But my friend
I was
from
going to
the
ask you
court
that
case in
towards the
Australia,
end. Yeah.
He came up with this analogy about cows, okay, and comparing the stages of the internet to dairy cows. So in the first internet, or Web 1.0, there were these cows. They were all over the place, but you couldn't really put them in a herd and milk them. It was uneconomic to gather the milk. You know, each cow made enough milk for itself. And that was the web in the early days. We were consumers of information. Each little website was its own little milk producer. And you took the milk from it, but nobody could turn that into a business. And that was Web 1.0. Web 2.0 is what happened when we saw the rise of these giants. First, MySpace and Google and Yahoo, and there was an ebb and flow of these. But what they started to do was coalesce the internet and coalesce the users and put it so that we would put things on the internet. Whereas previously in Web 1.0, you'd had to go out, find yourself a web host or your own computer, and you'd write your HTML and it would be a website. Now it was so beguilingly easy. You just get your Facebook account and you start saying whatever you want. And you're putting your stuff out there. But who's gathered it up? It's this big farmer called Facebook who's gathered all these cows into a giant herd and is milking them furiously. They're just, putting up their cat pics and their videos of their dogs. But somebody's making money. And that was the Googles and the YouTubes and the Facebooks. And it was centralized. They took this decentralized web and they centralized it. The promise of Web 3, which was what we're heading towards again, is to go back to this idea that anybody can publish, but now we can move the monetization or the reward aspect of that out of the center. So it won't be that only Facebook can sell massive advertising around your written words or your pictures, or only YouTube can sell advertising around your videos. That you can put things out there and either get direct, like we're doing with the value for value system, direct connection between audiences and the material that they value watching. So you value watching your show, Mere Mortals, give Mere Mortals a direct payment. And that way we cut out this sort of advertising infrastructure. And it doesn't really work in the old centralized way. It works when more and more of the infrastructure that we need to do this is back in our hands. And it's simple enough that we want to do it, but without us all having to become uber technical and running our own computers the way we did for Web 1.0.
Yeah.
Is that a good explanation?
I saw you'd written a blog post about and it was Moxie Marlinspike, I think that's how you said his name. His sort of foray into Web 3, and and that was also what triggered my conversation with Juan about decentralization. And he was essentially one of the points he was making is that no one wants to run their own servers because it's hard and it's boring. And
I've got a laptop running a server behind me. I've got an Umbral node in the cupboard.
Yeah, so
this computer I'm looking at is running Docker and doing, but I'm unusual.
Yeah, I was going to say you're one of the strange ones. What really made me think, I guess, with that analogy then was, it sort of breaks down, I guess, in that the user becomes the cow in a way, and then when you're going back into Web 3, what's the difference between then sort of you're milking your own cow again? And
well, the point is, it's my milk. I'm making it. I get to be a farmer who decides what to do with my milk. I mean, I can just,
I guess,
give it away for free, but at least I'm in control.
Yeah. I suppose I'm just thinking, is the analogy then now we have a in the first instance of Web 1, where you're milking your cow, and you can maybe you drink that milk for yourself, maybe you can share it with some friends who come over, but you don't have the reach, you don't have the ability to send that milk to Israel if you're in Australia. Would the analogy then sort of be like, now we have a somewhat system in place so that if I wanted to send that milk to Israel, like there's now a high speed version, or now it's like electronic milk, so I don't even need to physically send it. I'm able to connect to that person across the other side of the world.
Like all these analogies, they break down. It's the milk is the product, but how you get rewarded for it, the economic system whereby the farmer, where you cut out the farmer and each cow can sell their milk directly on a market. That is what is enabled by systems like Bitcoin and Lightning and Hive, because you need some way to transfer value that's a recognized token that you can put it into the system at one end and take it out at the other. Now, you can use PayPal and you can use the existing credit card infrastructure, but you've got to remember that in the middle sits PayPal. And my whole introduction to Hive and the decentralized web came because I was thrown off Facebook. So I was helping to run the Facebook page of someone who's very controversial in the UK. There's no point naming him. We grew a page up to over 1 million people. It was the most active political page in the UK. And the government and the opposition don't like him. And they gave orders to Facebook that he should be deleted. And he was deleted. And the thing was, my account, my Brian of London account that I had grown and had done lots of Israel advocacy on and videos and all of that stuff, overnight, it was deleted. I wasn't even banned or anything. It was just gone. And it's quite funny because, I can still find, if I can be bothered, which I'm not, you can find threads on Facebook where I was talking to people, and my comments have just been, Stalin airbrushed out of history. So there's a whole conversation where someone is talking to themselves. And what you don't know is that Brian of London used to be. and I realized we'd put in, myself, some other people, this guy in the UK, we'd put an enormous amount of effort in that had made Facebook immensely wealthy. Not just us, obviously, but on the back of the content we were putting on Facebook, Zuckerberg became a billionaire. And I was like, and I own nothing. And it can be taken away from me without any recourse. And there's definitely no one to sue. It's just gone. And I thought that there has to be something better. And that was when, I found Hive. Hive is not the be all and end all, but the thing is, understanding what's going on behind the scenes, understanding who is running the servers, what does it mean to have an account and to have one's own keys? Who can delete my comments? The way that Facebook went through and deleted my entire history of everything I'd ever said, who can do that? And I look at Hive and I know cryptographically that unless 2/3 of all the people running all of the equipment that runs it, unless 2/3 of them decide to take such a drastic step, it can't be done. And I also know on a technical level, nobody could be bothered. There just isn't the will. It's a whole load of implausible things. So whereas it's not like I'm 100% convinced that that's the only way forward, I just don't want to trust anybody. I don't want to have to trust Twitter. I'm on Twitter. I use Twitter. I expect my account to disappear tomorrow. That's how I use Twitter. It's just a funnel to get people to other places where I have a voice in a system that I understand is more permanent.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I haven't had this experience myself, but I used to watch this guy. Let me just reach over here. I've got this little sticker here of this guy who I used to follow, who was a pickup artist called Rushvi. And
Oh yeah. That was around the same time that we. Yeah, I mean, I know I followed the story of Rouge being banned.
yeah,
I mean, I wasn't interested in his work, but I was interested in it's the phenomenon, and you never think it's going to happen to you or someone you are interested in until it does, and then it does.
yeah, exactly. Like I remember he was just a niche dude. Like I was reading him back when I was 15, 16, and interested in picking up
Picking up
girls,
girls.
obviously. And yeah, seeing he was always really niche. He was always a really niche dude. And then one day he's, on the front page of, the Australian news.com.au. And it's just like, what the hell is happening here? It was
Books were deleted from Amazon.
yeah,
Just unpersonal.
yeah, from PayPal, from yeah, he essentially was. And that was probably one of the reasons why one of the like little stepping points, which was allowed me to connect why cryptocurrencies are so interesting, and why decentralization actually matters. One hypothetical I had for you was, because I didn't grow up, like I grew up sort of with the internet. I can remember it being there for most of my life. I can remember like a tiny portion where there was no real internet, where it was just like you try doing something and you get 5 search results or something like that.
I'm going to have to reveal my age, aren't I?
What would it have been possible if the value for value model was, I guess, maybe like known or more popular in, let's just say, 97? Would there have been no need for the Facebooks of the world to actually be created, or was it just like you needed the centralization to come along to create something like the blockchain or cryptocurrencies, and then it's like now we can go back to maybe where we should have been right at the start of Web 1?
That is a great question. I'll get grief from No Agenda people on that. But no, you mentioned 1997. So 1997 is the year I was awarded my PhD, and that was in Leeds. And up until for the 4 years, well, I'd been at university from 1989. Yeah, from 1989 until 1997, I was at universities. So I got a degree in Sheffield and then a PhD in Leeds. And I had watched the internet grow because I'd been on campus using computers. I was using very early, teletype green screen type terminals to log into bizarre systems I can't even remember the names of. And then the internet arrived. I got interested in Usenet, which was the sort of Usenet groups. Met a girl in Colorado, went horse riding on her place. Weird stories. And actually, Tim Berners-Lee came and gave a talk in Leeds sometime. I'd have no idea. I don't have a good diary. 95 probably. And he was already by then, HTTPS, the security system, wasn't there at the start. That was a kludge they added on later. When we were started to send credit card numbers and everybody realized you could just look at what was being sent and you could see everything. And so they added HTTPS, and it's still a catastrophe and all of that stuff. And money wasn't even, there was just no concept of exchanging value in those earliest days. It didn't occur. Everybody was of the sort of the mindset of John Perry Barlow, the internet is free and information needs to be free, and it's all Grateful Dead type.
Yeah.
Almost hangover hippie stuff. And when it started to get commercialized, was when Google went from being that clean interface to start having those little ads at the top. And I think that moment, which nobody, we were all like frogs being boiled in water. I don't think the technologies existed to do what we're doing today. Satoshi hadn't invented or shown to the world the way to use blockchains and cryptography. The computers weren't powerful enough. I mean, I remember when SSL started, literally servers were not strong enough to do the handshake with the encryption at the beginning. Everything had to be beefed up. And we don't understand the progression. My very first computer was when I was 11 in 1981. So do the maths, I'll be 52 this year. And that was a ZX81 with 1 kilobyte of RAM. And I bought a 16 kilobyte RAM pack, and I would type programs into it. And we've gone from that to, I don't even want to tell you what's on the screen in front of me. In a relatively short, the tech wasn't there to do peer-to-peer then. And I don't think we could have got to where we are now without this enormous financial growth in the internet. And what I see now happening in blockchain especially is that there are some good projects, some niche little projects that don't get the big headlines and they don't get vast amounts of money, but they are being driven by the open source software that has dripped off this monstrous monetization. The huge Airbnbs and Facebooks and Googles, they've sort of shed these little open source projects they don't really care about. And interesting people have picked those up and said, hey, we can do some really cool stuff with that. And when you combine it with the promise of Bitcoin, which is this peerless, with this trustless system of exchanging value, that is unbelievably powerful. That does make all of this possible.
Yeah, well, maybe it's almost like you needed the centralization and the someone to actually just prove, hey, you can actually create a social media company that'll go worldwide. Like you can have a system where everyone, now granted, there's still language barriers and things like that, but I could talk with anyone who speaks English across the world. Essentially, like the access is there. It's doable. And now maybe we can find a way of creating a similar sort of thing, but without the censorship. And I guess, like, is that the main thing that decentralization offers? Is there anything beneath you avoiding censorship? So no one can, press the button, push their finger, kick you off anywhere. Is that the sort of like where it hits the wall and it's like there's nothing deeper than this? There's no as long as decentralization fixes this, there's nothing else it really else needs to do.
I think very few people understand how bad censorship is. And so just to be able to say this fixes censorship. Now, censorship is not just speech, and it is not the right, and it doesn't mean you have the right to be heard, but financial transactions can be censored. And that's exactly what's going on in Canada when they confiscate people's bank accounts or close people's bank accounts or close access to them. That's financial censorship. That's just as pernicious as speech. If you go back through history, show me a regime you don't like, and I'll show you their censors. It's just as simple as that. There has never been a good system of governance that involved mass censorship. It doesn't exist. So anytime I hear anybody talking about, misinformation, malinformation, disinformation, we have to restrict those. We have to enforce some kind of greater power. We know what's best for you. Every single one of those is on a path to a totalitarian, dark future, and it just is. And I'm seeing. Funny, I got my third shout out on No Agenda this weekend for the same thing. It's like a few weeks ago during the Canadian truckers protest. Adam and John entitled the episode "Honk Honk." Now, I've been on the internet a long, long time, and I've watched it grow, and I know all of the machinations of the neo-Nazis online. It's not that I follow them, it's just I'm a Jew who's overtly a Zionist living in Israel, and every now and then you get waves of shit thrown at you. And I've seen it all, and I just hit block, block, block. I don't care. I don't want them censored. I don't need to have them removed from platforms. I'm not interested. I just hit block, but I know all the ways that they talk. And one of their key pieces of symbology is Heil Hitler. and they have so many different ways of saying Heil Hitler that only they know. And one of them is honk honk, which is for HH, or it's 88. I know all of this stuff because it has been thrown at me in the past. So immediately after I see that episode of No Agenda drop, and I just see the title in a dropper, and I go, oh God, they've called the episode honk honk. The Neos are going to go, they're going to be immediately wondering, listening through a whole 3-hour episode to try and find out where's the hidden Nazi symbology in this. And it wasn't. The truckers in Canada just happened to start using honk honk because they were honking their horns. It made sense. Yeah. So I sent Adam a quick Telegram message. And the following show, he mentioned on the show that he'd got this message from me. And he asked John, have you ever heard of this honk honk being Heil Hitler? No. Lo and behold, of course, last week, somebody stood up in the Canadian Parliament and said, honk honk is code for Heil Hitler, the truckers are all Nazis. It's like, how dumb do you have to be? If you've ever learned to dive and you've told your instructor has asked you, do you have enough air? And the correct response is, okay. And then, somewhere in the depths of the idiot insanity of the left, they come up with the idea that this is I can't even remember what that meant.
Because white power, I think, the W and the
white
P.
Power, yeah, W, whatever. It's like, how do you get there? But the point here, where were we? We were talking about censorship. I've gone off on a tangent. Every single time someone says you've got to restrict what people can say, it ends in disaster. It does. It just does. And for we've had a good, I think we've had a good run in the Western civilization, the Anglosphere, as Winston Churchill called it. We've had a good run of avoiding that, but we're falling into it now, and it's terrifying. Actually, it's really terrifying.
One of the things I was thinking about was, what's the problem behind so why do people censor others? Well, it's because there's conflict. Why is there conflict? Well, it's usually because people value things differently, and I don't think that's ever going away. And that's just, if you're a woman, you're going to value something different than a man. Even if you're, my brother, even though I'm genetically half of him, is the same as me, we value things differently, and that's always going to happen. And I'm just wondering, like, is this sort of we're finding a way of just accepting that there's always going to be different values. And so when there was, the opportunity to easily perhaps, just kill someone back in the day, like when I'm talking back in the day before laws, you have this value conflict, and well, that maybe the easiest way is just to off them or harm them or threaten them or something like that. So then you invent laws, and then that goes on for a while, and then now we have a new way of interacting via the internet and via electronics and airwaves and stuff. And it's the same thing. When there's an easy way to just get rid of the problem, you just do it. And so this is sort of also why I'm sort of overjoyed, I guess, that decentralization is happening. It's just taking away that quick immediate fix of this person is saying something mean, I don't like it. And yeah, I'm happy to hear that your view is sort of just a block. That's the easiest way. Like, there's no point going after
He's
them.
not adding anything to my life. I'm not going to give him mind space. That's just how it is.
Yeah, 100%.
Does that message exist? Did you see the thing that what becomes dangerous is thinking that because you have now cancelled something from Twitter, it no longer is there. I mean, really, that's back to Douglas Adams and the ravenous bug blatter beast of Troll, a beast so mind-bogglingly stupid that it thinks that if it can't see you, you don't exist. It's like you cover its eyes and the problem has gone away. It just, you can't, I can't get my head around the idea that rational people think that we're going to stop Nazi ideology, which is a terrifyingly small fringe and of no significance because it holds no cultural power anywhere. Well, it just doesn't drive culture. And yet American Jews, for example, are terrified of it. It's like, I don't care what these people do in their basements with their silly flags. I'm just not interested. Whereas the kind of mass movement to eradicate Israel and to say that we're an illegitimate state, that produces resolutions at the UN, and that actually does drive culture, and that does grip most modern left-wing mainstream media. That's a problem, because it's saying that my whole country needs to disappear into yet another Islamic state. That's a problem. That's something I'm going to be worried about. And silencing some Nazis online doesn't help.
Yeah, the misinformation one's funny as well, because it's just like, you really don't think humans, and I'm including myself well in this, we're not going to find something else stupid to believe in. Like, one keeps on coming up with this example, which was back in the day, people were, when we first invented trains, were worried what would happen to our organs, because we were moving at such a speed that, what's going to happen? Are they going to like leak out of us? Are they going to,
you'll not be able to breathe.
Do something. Yeah.
If you ride in a car faster than a horse can ride, the air you won't be able to draw breath.
Yeah. Things like that. Y2K. It doesn't matter. There's always something stupid we can believe in, and whether that's on the internet or your friend at the pub telling you some dumb story, like it's going to be there no matter what. So trying to eradicate it is I always have a chuckle at that.
And there's this mindset of that some people who genuinely believe that they are smarter than me and can decide what I can and can't process. So that if I hear a theory that the earth is flat and there's a firmament and a dome above us, and I will immediately become a flat earther and
you
live
can't
my
help
life according
but be
to
drawn into it.
Yeah. And people are just not dumb. The vast, 50% of people are below average intelligent, I will grant, but even below average intelligence manages not to get drawn in by all of the nonsense on the internet. Some of it, but most of it, you can't stop this stuff. The only thing you can do is provide better information. And the modern drive to censor has completely and utterly given up on providing better information. It's like, the CDC not publishing COVID scientific results because they think it will be misinterpreted. And then everybody won't go and get their vaccination.
Yeah. And they wonder why, because there's stuff being hidden behind closed doors and whatnot. Yeah. It's silly, and the arrogance is pretty gross, but what you gonna do? You've mentioned Hive a couple of times, so I wanted to jump into that, and I've followed like the founding story of it, and God, is that a shit show? Like, so I suppose, like, could you just give me like a general overview of what Hive is, and maybe we can go into the story of it as well, because it's kind of funny.
So Hive started as something called STEEM, and it started as going back to the idea of a Facebook. What makes Facebook centralized? All of the computers that run Facebook there's computers that show you the actual web page, or that send you how to draw the web page. But then there's computers at the back that contain all of the information in Facebook, and they are massive. And it's just rooms and rooms and rooms all over the world of computers that run that huge database that we call Facebook. To make an alternative to that, where there's not one central point of control, where no one person has got like this master power that says, delete Brian of London, is actually really difficult. Anyway, some guys, 6-7 years ago, tried to do that. And they came up with something called STEEM. And it kind of works. It's where the computer power, the database for a social network is stored in a system a bit like Bitcoin, but not like Bitcoin. The technical differences. Firstly, it doesn't use ridiculous amounts of energy. It uses computer power to store text. That's what it's really good at. And Bitcoin can't do this because it would just eat the world of energy. STEEM was very, very efficient with energy, but it stored text. But you have to decide some way to choose the next block, it's called in Bitcoin terms. And in Bitcoin is secured with energy and with the expense of buying the computers to solve this stupid hash problem. It's just a made up guessing game. Yeah. STEEM doesn't do that made up guessing game, but it stores text really efficiently. And actually, whilst it was never meant to be democratized like tens of thousands of people running nodes, it was always meant to be run by, at first a top 20 of witnesses, and then it needs 50 to 100 people running somewhat significant infrastructure. But the point here is that no one of them can decide to change the record of what has happened. It takes a 2/3 majority of the top 20 to change the software on which the system is built. And they built what I think was a really interesting system. And always when you start these projects, the founders tend to give themselves a big pile of money. The system itself has got its own internal currency. At the time, it was called STEEM. They created a company called SteemIt, which was confusing. SteemIt ran a blog called steemit.com. But
was any of this in relation to the gaming place where you buy, get games and whatnot?
No, it had no relation to Steam, the gaming company.
Yeah, okay, that's
and this was complexity. STEEM, and they are Steam with an A.
Yeah.
In fact, the name came from a whole kind of a steampunk. There was a steampunk theme which came from the work of Neil Stephenson, and it was prevalent in internet circles at that time. So that they came up with this, and it was all made possible because in Bitcoin you have inflation. Okay, it was big at the start. You got was it 50 Bitcoin per block now, and then it halved to 25, and now it's down to 6 or something per block. That is Bitcoin's inflation. That's how Bitcoin is going to give away 21 million Bitcoin and then stop. HIVE has got a similar inflation system, except it's not. It doesn't stop like Bitcoin. It's not asymptomatic. Not asymptomatic. Asymptotic.
Asymptotic. Yeah. That's
only a trained physicist can use words like asymptotic. So HIVE has got inflation, so it creates more of its own internal. STEEM at that time. It creates its own internal money, and it gives that out to the people running the infrastructure, running the computers. But that back end is open. Anyone can read it. It's not like Facebook's closed computer system. It's like, this is the history of everything that's gone on our social network. These are the API calls. You can just write your own front end, and people do. So there are multiple ways at that time. There were multiple ways of looking at STEEM, through apps on your phone, through different website front ends. And then there were also different things you could do with the back end. So someone created a game called Splinterlands, which was like Magic the Gathering. It was a card trading game. But each card was, I don't want to use the word, each card is an NFT.
Yeah, yes, there we go.
and all that means is Splinterlands would say, okay, we're gonna create 500 of this type of card. And we're gonna randomly, when people win games, sometimes they'll get a new card, or if they buy a starter pack, it will be in there. But when we say we're going to produce 500 of this type of card, they mean it. And they only produced 500. And these are all the serial numbers. And these are who owns all of those cards. And you could see on the blockchain, if you know what to do and people built the tools, you could see the history of every time that card was used in a battle. Did it win? Did it lose? What was, you can, so the cards have value. They are non-fungible because each card is different. It was created the same, there might have been 500 of them, but then it goes through a whole history of battling. So that card at the end is totally unique. It's not like even the same card because it hasn't had the same history. So you start to, and what happens with an open system, which is what Steam was the people who created that game, for example, built on top of Steam. They didn't censor anybody. They didn't stop another group of people putting up a new website where you could trade your cards. They had no control over it. And this is something that the modern game companies, EA and Fortnite people, Epic and stuff, they haven't got the mindset yet of allowing trade just totally free, totally outside of their control. Once they've created those assets, they're on a market that they don't control. And that's a very interesting, that to me is what NFTs are, not stupid GIFs that you pay 15 ETH. I don't understand that part. But anyway, back to the story of Steam. So they created Steam, and the founders did give themselves a big pile of steam to start with. And they said that it would be for the good of the community, they would keep the company running. And Steam initially had a massive growth, actually some of it driven by advertising on Facebook and Google, which one of the members did, took on loads of new users. And then it went into a slump, like everything did in crypto in 2018, in the big crypto winter. But it always kept running. And it was this company in the middle called Steam that was driving a lot of the development and providing some of the infrastructure, but then more and more, the infrastructure was being decentralized, i.e. people were seeing the utility in this system. They were building businesses, they were building interesting ideas and interesting websites with the Steam backend. And it got to the point in, I haven't got the dates in front of me. What was it? It was this 2020, just as the pandemic was starting, that this guy, the last founder of Steam was still in Steam. And Steam still held about 25 or 30% of the outstanding Steam, the currency. And they did a backroom deal. This guy, Justin Sun, a alleged billionaire who came out of China somehow, and has this thing called the Tron blockchain. He did some deal where he just bought from the founder, this guy Ned, he bought Steam the company and all of his Steam. And the thing is that what controls Steam and now Hive is all of the users who have some currency, they vote for who runs the infrastructure, these what are called the witnesses. And if you control 2/3 of the top 20 witnesses, you can change the software. And if you can change the software and you know what you're doing, then you could delete Brian of London. For sure, that is possible. But what this system is called is a delegated proof of stake. My stake is how much of the currency I hold. Steam held a lot of currency. So as soon as Justin Sun owned Steam and had bought in a below market value transaction, as soon as we kind of looked, and the people on Steam got nervous because they built businesses, and he was starting to talk about, we'll transfer this to Tron and we'll do this and we'll do that. But it's like, no, we quite like the way we are and we don't want centralized Chinese control. I'll pause. How's this going?
Yeah, no. This links up with what I'd sort of read up and got into. And I think the interesting thing was sort of like all cryptos, it has to start off centralized. There's got to be one person or a group of people, Satoshi Nakamoto, Vitalik, whoever it is.
This is the trick. The trick is, once one person has had the idea, can it move to a point where it's decentralized enough to survive before it's it's noticed by the big money people.
Mm.
And Bitcoin achieved that. Bitcoin achieved grand scale slowly enough that you turned around one day, and to attack Bitcoin, to take over the Bitcoin network, would cost trillions of dollars. It's unthinkable, because it's not just the value of Bitcoin and what secures Bitcoin system today is not just what it would cost. It's what it would cost to buy the hardware now to beat the hash rate. But you're basically competing against not just today's energy usage, but the historical energy usage of where we are, how we got to here. So it's a crazy thing. But in any new, if you try and start up any new decentralized project, you go through this phase where you're not decentralized. You can be bought. And how do you get past that point? And that's what so the next part of this story is, Justin Sun had bought it, and we started to have, and when I say we, I mean, I wasn't developing actively, but I was busy on the back end, and I'd sort of met the primary people who ran some of the bigger parts of the infrastructure, but who were not in the company STEEM.
Yeah,
and they were worried.
Just a question: would you say the majority of people, they were still like lone traders in a way? Like, it's not like there was many companies being formed up within STEEM at that stage, right?
It was arranged. Okay, so there was a guy called Block. There's a guy, unfortunately, another Dan, because there's lots of Dans in this story, but there was a Dan who runs a thing called Block Trades, which was it's a licensed exchange. It will buy and sell Bitcoin and HIVE and HIVE dollars and stuff. He had a business, and he was there at the beginning. He was one of the coders that was busy at the beginning. And then there's this business called Splinterlands, which has grown to be the #1 blockchain game in the world. It's probably bigger than Axie Infinity, but it doesn't get the headlines because it hasn't had any VC money or stuff. And then there's a bunch of other little businesses who make money, who have active businesses. They get paid, but in Hive for some of the things, and then they make money around it. And then there's a lot of enthusiastic loners. And some of the sort of enthusiastic loners are responsible for some very key parts of the development that has happened. But generally, it's all open source. They develop something and it goes out into the public, and people use it. So there was a spectrum. But what there was, other than this company Steemit, there was nobody capitalized with big money. And Steemit itself had made money in the beginning, but was burning through its money, keeping some of the infrastructure going, because it was relatively inefficient. It hadn't been optimized. And this is something that happens with startups all the time. You have an idea, you get to 10,000 customers or 10,000 users, and then a VC puts in $15 million, and you just go nuts with it, and you don't worry about scaling right. And Twitter went through this with the fail whale. It's like, did you build your tech? Steam was, to a certain extent, not optimized. Anyway, the idea was always that the value within the Steemit company was going to help do this optimization, but it was moving too slowly. So Justin Sun came in and he started saying some really weird stuff. And it was clear he's not a technologist. And it was also clear that his people were not particularly, they didn't understand the community aspect of Steam. They didn't understand why we loved it. Why it was our home on the web. And he couldn't just change the underlying technology because it would look good on his marketing stuff. And it got to a point where the people who were the current top 20 witnesses, 2/3 of them agreed, okay, we're just going to put a break on this guy. All of the Steam that he just bought in his cheap transaction, we're just going to change the rules a little bit. And this was very controversial. And we're going to put a freeze on it. We're going to stop him voting with it. And that was a big change to the network, but they enacted this change in what's called a hard fork. And that set off an absolute crazy cascade of events. So Justin Sun decided that this was basically the theft of all of the Steam that he had just bought for $4 or $5 million or whatever the value was. And he went bananas. He went to his friends at the exchanges. And you've talked about crypto on your show quite a bit. So your audience probably knows the mantra, not your keys, not your crypto. Some people store their crypto on an exchange because they want to trade actively. What Justin Sun did was he went to Binance and he went to Poloniex, which he owned actually, and he went to HIVE, which he didn't own, but these are all Chinese adjacent exchanges that had big quantities of Steam. So their users were storing their Steam on an exchange, wasn't in their wallets.
Yeah, and therefore giving up the power to vote.
Yes, they weren't able to vote because in order to vote on Steam, you needed to lock up your Steam for 13 weeks. It's called powering up. And 13 weeks is, it's 3 months. It's a controversially long time. And what happens is you say, okay, I'm going to lock up $1,000 worth of Steam. And you press the button and it powers it up. And if you want it back, you say power down and you get 1/13 of the Steam back every week for 13 weeks. And that's your commitment to the network. It's an investment in the network, and that gives you some voting rights to choose who runs these witnesses and various other important tasks. But most people didn't know this. They were just using it to post cat pictures. And the level of voting was, I don't know what the exact numbers were, but maybe it was like 30 or 40% were actively knowing who they were voting for. But he went to these exchanges and said, oh, just power up your Steam. Don't worry, because I need to fight off this attack. Somebody, I've been attacked. Power up your Steam. Once we've taken back control from the evil hackers, I will change the rules and you'll be able to power down immediately. So Binance, HIVE, and Poloniex all powered up all of their customers' Steam. That meant no more trading. You couldn't withdraw. You would look on your Binance account, and I know one guy who had $1 million on Binance of Steam, and he hit withdraw, and there was no way on earth that they could give it back to him because it was powered up. They couldn't move it. So they did that. Justin Sun took over the network with a bunch of what are called sock puppets. So they created, probably on the same computer, multiple witnesses, all running a new version of the software that he had the people at Steam it write quickly to reverse this block that the old, that the community had put on him, and then also to change the rules and to start, actually, they started doing some censorship of the front ends, which was like blocking negative comments about him. This was war. That act was war. And what it did was, and that's what we call the alien invasion. That was when the real people, the people who had sort of sweated for this, they got into a back room and they said, okay, we're going to try and take back the chain. And we tried to take back the chain by voting, and we got the voting numbers up massively. We got everybody that we could voting, and we almost took back the top 2/3 of the voting, and to get these witnesses so we could change the software again. But we weren't powerful enough. And even when, eventually Binance and Bittrex and Poloniex, actually Bittrex wasn't involved, they were encouraged, they eventually understood what they had done. And they hit the power down button, but Justin Sun wasn't strong enough by then to change the rules so they could power down immediately. And they realized that they had all of their customers' funds locked up for 13 weeks. And that's, if crypto, in 10 years' time, that would be a massive violation. But crypto is a bit of a wild west, and this was all happening outside of American exchanges. There's no SEC to wade in and say, hey, you've got to give back those customers' funds now. You shouldn't have done this. You were not allowed to vote with customer funds, but the rules are not there. So long story short, we couldn't take back the chain by just voting. So a plot was hatched to switch to what's called fork, and to change the rules and to change the name, leave Justin Sun with his Steem that he bought and his Steemit company, just take all the community, take all of our activity, copy the software because it's all open source, set up all the computers again, and call it Hive. Don't know how the name Hive came to be. It just did, and it got a Canadian blockchain company that runs Bitcoin hardware very upset, and they wanted to sue because we announced the name Hive, and they said, but we're Hive blockchain. And everybody just shrugged and said, where are you going to send the papers? Because there's no office, there's no CEO, there's no CFO, there's no title person who is Hive. There's no office because it's a community. And what we did was, the funds that Justin Sun had sort of bought, instead of Steem, what happened was, on a specific day, we said, okay, you keep your Steem, everybody keeps Steem, but we're going to create a copy of Steem with all of the history. We're going to call it Hive. It's going to have all the history back to the first block. And every Steem that you have, we're going to give you one Hive. And there was a 1-to-1, it was like a stock share split, a 1-to-1. Everybody who had Steem got Hive, except Justin Sun didn't, Steemit, the company, didn't, and a bunch of the witnesses who had helped Justin Sun take over the system. They didn't get any Hive. And again, that was another controversial move, but this was an airdrop. We weren't taking away anybody's Steem. We were just not giving them Hive. It's like this. If you walk into the bank and you see everybody there and you start handing out $20 bills, that's legal. But what you can't do is walk into a bank and take $20 bills from everybody. We were giving something new. And whether the market was going to give any value to Hive, that was just to be determined, but it quickly did.
Yeah.
And what happened was, all of the useful activity, posting, videos, all of that stuff moved very quickly to Hive. This big game, Splinterlands, they moved every activity over onto Hive. And the sort of notional Hive that wasn't given to Justin Sun, that went into a big pot, which we called the Decentralized Hive Fund, DHF, which is our version of a DAO. It's not got, I think it's got 11 or $12 million in it now today. And we use that now going forward to pay for projects. And what this gives us, this is what makes Hive unbelievably rare. Because of this birth in an alien invasion, we don't have founders. We don't have a company, a venture capital firm. We've got no big holders. We don't think any single person owns more than 3% of Hive. That's decentralized. That's unique in crypto world outside of Bitcoin, really.
Yeah, there's a couple of things that I find really interesting from the whole story. One is, I guess, you sometimes hear about how would it actually happen? There would be a cabal, because with conspiracy theories, there's always the people in the shadows or the Illuminati or whatever it is, and it's just like it's kind of refreshing in a way to see that there actually was a group that did manage to pull it off, that did manage to sort of hijack what against the wishes of the general populace. So it was kind of illuminating to see oh shit, yeah, that actually can happen.
Wait, let's just clear one thing up. Whilst it was a relatively, I don't know, probably 30 or 40 individuals that needed to set up the hardware, had we not had the backing of the wider community, Because once we created Hive on this day and we said, stop your activity on Steam, move it to Hive. Your keys are the same, your passwords are the same, the system looks the same, it's just got a different logo and a different color. It took the wider community moving to give Hive any future or value. So, and this is what I think that this is why Bitcoin is frozen in time. It's like there is no method of changing Bitcoin. It's now locked. It's going to change tiny. It takes 4 years of arguing to add a different style of address for Taproot, or it's really difficult to move it. Hive, I'm not saying it should be easy, but this idea of a community fork, and I think we might see this in some of the Ethereum stuff, where some VC goes and puts $100 million into a project, and if it manages to build a really good, strong community, and it's truly open source, and the community says, you know what, we can just fork them out, and we'll take our activity somewhere else. That's an interesting model. Can that happen to Hive again? It could, but we don't have that centralized force to fight against. And for us, it took that alien invasion to make this worth doing.
Yeah, the other cool thing is you mentioned it a couple of times, the time aspect. It's almost like you need just a section where there is no huge growth, where there isn't that massive influx of capital, and it's like, what do we do with this now? Let's make some silly decisions. Well, let's spend it all. Sort of mentality, which happens, and they need to look as far as lottery winners to see how often that happens. So there is, it's funny how time itself becomes such an important factor in it, and it's almost like how can you predict when things need more time to sort of just stagnate a little bit, to not do anything. And what effect that has on the psychology of the people using it. I find that really interesting, how that works. So all that was like a great intro, I guess, to one of the things that you're really doing with the Hive blockchain, which is PodPing. And if you've listened to Mere Mortals before, you'd have heard me casually mention it offhand, but just my sort of understanding of what PodPing is, it's well, the annoying thing is you keep doing new things with it, so it's morphing. But like it was originally a way of like a notification system, essentially.
That's what it is, actually.
Yeah,
it's a global message bus, a global notification system. This is something really interesting that's never existed on the internet. The sort of the idea that you can do at everyone and send a message out that anyone who's interested can see it. Now, Twitter has become that to a certain extent. But the problem with Twitter is, as my friend, he was banned from Facebook, he was also banned from Twitter. The problem with Twitter or Facebook or any of these systems, whereas you can communicate to billions of people, you do not own or control your account, so you can be cut off. And the corollary is you need some infrastructure to carry a message. If you want to do, it's like the emergency broadcast system that the Americans have, and most countries, Israel's got it. We have text messages on our phones, but more important than that, we have a wailing siren that is going, and it's real. We use it for real rocket attacks, but we also use it for Memorial Day for the soldiers, and but that's infrastructure. The government pays for that infrastructure. For PodPing, for podcasting, which is decentralized, if you want to announce that your podcast has changed, how do you do it? The old way was that everybody would just change their podcast, their RSS feed would add a new item, and then you would just sit there glumly waiting for the world to come and notice. And then what that led to, and what exists today, is that hundreds of thousands of computers, well, actually there's 4 million RSS feeds, are being checked every hour, every 10 minutes, every, whatever it is, in order to to catch that moment when your feed has changed. PodPing turns that around and says, okay, this is the way you can shout to the whole world, I've changed. And a blockchain is a terrible database. It's a really slow and awful database. That, you know, that there are many, many better ways of doing a notification system than with a blockchain at the back. But all of those better ways involve somebody paying for the computer, somebody paying for the infrastructure that holds the message that where everyone can look and say, I've updated. And Dave Jones was all set to build that as part of Podcast Index. And we trust Dave Jones and we trust Podcast Index. And we know that they're not into censorship or anything like that. But they were going to have to pay for it in perpetuity. And every time I look at a system where I always try and delve in, who's paying for the server? Because if it's Facebook, okay, I know where they get their money. I understand the economic model. I either agree with it and I want them to rate my personal information and sell it to the highest bidder, or I don't. That's the choice, but it's a conscious choice I make. If somebody wants to run, I will not trust anybody who says for charity, I'm going to run a global notification system for 4 million podcasts, which might contain neo-Nazi content or misinformation about COVID. And I promise I'll never block the notifications from NazisReus.rss. I won't trust anybody who says that they're going to be that altruistic for the rest of time. But what Hive presented me with is a system where I understand the economics of it. The people running the hardware today are rewarded by the inflation of the Hive system, just like Bitcoin miners are rewarded. So they're happy to keep running their Bitcoin mine nodes, and people who run Hive are happy to keep running Hive. And this little notification system for podcasting represents less than 0.1% of the traffic. And nobody even notices it. But meanwhile, we've built a system that can handle 4 million. It doesn't yet, but it could handle every podcast on earth, announcing every new episode. And I know where the cost is. I know who's paying for it. I got actually a grant from Hive to do the work. You know, I did the work first and then I got a grant. And most of that money is used as what's called powered up Hive to give me the power to do this. But Hive is amazing because the transactions, the individual pings, when we put out a notification, we do not pay per ping. We just have to have, today it's worth about $3,000 or $4,000 worth of stake, backing up our account to give us the power to perpetually send out these messages. And the other great thing about, you know, a blockchain is a terrible database, but it is at least a database. So if you miss a week's worth of pod pings, you can replay all of them. You can it's very simple. You just get a little Python script, boom, it will tell you every account, every show that's been announced for the last week or month or 6 months. It's all there. And this hasn't existed before. And people haven't got their heads actually around the implication. So, you know, the next thing we're doing with it is live notifications. And I think that's going to catch the attention of Facebook and YouTube and Twitter, because today you can go live on Twitch or you can go live on YouTube or Twitter or Facebook. All of these have got some element of, you know, a live broadcast. They do not share those notifications anywhere. Okay, you won't be looking at Facebook and it will tell you, oh, someone's gone live on YouTube. We've produced at least the back end for an open notification system. Any app will be able to watch the notifications for your show. And this hasn't existed up to now. Now, it's not going to happen overnight, but the podcasting 2.0 apps will probably lead the way. But then I think others will. You know, I'm talking with a video streaming service called Vim, which operates on Hive to a certain extent, but their streaming is obviously outside of blockchain. but they're looking at this because they can tell their users that one of their other users is live, but they can't tap into a cross-platform system. And that's what PodPing is going to become, I believe.
Yeah, for sure. And for those who are wondering, like, oh, but a notification system, like, how useful is that? Like, the analogy I sort of think is, imagine every time instead of using your email where your email gets things coming into it, imagine every time you had to go out and physically be like, oh, did my friend Juan send me any emails this last week or yesterday?
Yeah. Juan is on Google. I'll check Google for incoming mail. Oh, John is on another system. I'll have to check John's email system and pull his email in. Yeah, that's the thing is email was a global message bus, and we achieved decentralized email before anyone realized. It's like, except that like all these other things, Gmail has captured a vast amount of the email space. And what was once a fully decentralized protocol is no longer. And the point is that the internet got to this point without ever having a decentralized message bus running on infrastructure, which it's not that nobody needs to pay for it, but the economics are organized such that it's just there. It's like when you send an email, your email is going to go through 2 or 3 or 4 computers, none of which you pay for. And that's why there's a spam problem. We've got some protections in Hive against spam and so on, but this genius kind of bit of infrastructure was never built at the start. And again, I don't think it could have been. I don't think the systems exist. Whereas trustless blockchains do provide this method, but not Bitcoin and not Ethereum doing proof of work. Those systems will never do this. That's why I think is a sort of it's unique in the way it works and the way it is owned by nobody and everybody. I own enough of Hive to allow me and podcasting to do this. And anybody else can come along and put their pings on PodPing. They might have to buy $100 worth of Hive or $50 worth of Hive, but that'll be enough for them in perpetuity.
Yeah. What is there any limits, I guess, to what maybe PodPing can do in the sense, like, is it always going to only have a podcasting specific function? Like, would you ever see it expanding out into other things?
It's just the standard is out there. Anybody else wants to pick it up and run with it? Yeah. I mean, I think it could be a notification system for all RSS feeds in general. There's no reason why it shouldn't be. It's just podcasting 2.0. We're blessed to have Adam and Dave sort of driving some innovation, because that was back to that Moxie Marlin Spike piece. He said something there very important, which was that centralized, overfunded entities like a Facebook and Twitter, they can drive internal innovation very, very quickly. Doing things in the open standards world, where everybody sort of slowly reaches an agreement, tends to be a lot slower. And that's where we are. That's the difference. That's why podcasting sort of atrophied for almost 15 years. Very little changed. But now we're driving the tech, and we're driving it outside of the Spotify and these other ones that want to make changes but keep those changes internal to their own systems. Anybody can use Hive. I don't think people have, it's just, look, it's different. Understanding the way a blockchain database sort of system works it takes developers, your mindset has to change, but once it does, you start seeing new possibilities.
Yeah, it's funny seeing so one of the things, like my little intro to crypto sort of actually started really with podcasting 2.0 and seeing like, oh wow, you can actually use Bitcoin for something. So I'd sort of bought some back in like 2018, held on to it for a while, ended up getting rid of it. It was just it was just something that was there that I couldn't really do anything with. And this was the first use case I could actually see, like, wow, that's amazing. And then that sort of led me to Hive, and then to some of the other ones where I see like, oh, these have a specific use case that's really, really interesting. Is there any Hive maxis out there? Because I haven't seen any, but
no. Why would you be? It's like Bitcoin does something amazing. Hive is not going to do what Bitcoin does. I say that, but yeah, I think that Hive is going to be a reasonable source of that store of value. Hive has got an amazing little thing called the Hive. It's either called the Hive. It's called the Hive Blockchain Dollar, HBD, and it is a stable coin inside of Hive that's algorithmically tries to keep itself pegged to the dollar, and it varies. It's at 97 cents right now. It fluctuates a bit, and there's a big effort to sort of keep it stable, and it's done reasonably well actually over the last 3 or 4 months at keeping stability, and it pays 12% interest per year. What's not to like? And I understand the economics of where that's coming from, and it actually makes sense. There is enough money coming into the Hive ecosystem through Splinterlands, selling cards, and all sorts of other sort of generators of value, that the whole ecosystem makes sense. But it's not Bitcoin, and it's not trying to do what Bitcoin does. Now, I am linking it up. I mean, that's my own thing, is I'm linking it up with the value for value system. So, for example, I have a Lightning node, and I can receive value payments on the value for value system. Like when I was on Podcasting 2.0 last week, all week I've been receiving a share, 10% split of what Adam and Dave get. But what I do with that is that comes to my node, and it comes with my name, Brian of London, on it. And then computers that I have running here, running software that I wrote, immediately receive the transaction, say, oh, I'm going to give that to Hive. And the advantage of giving that into a Hive account is that you can get a Hive account. It's just a bunch of keys, and you don't have to run your own infrastructure. You don't have to run an Umbral node. And while you're asleep, you don't have to worry that your channels are going to get unbalanced, and you won't be able to receive a payment that will then not be made. So I think that for receiving value, Hive is actually a stronger value proposition. Lots of people are using the Satoshi stream on Telegram. He's doing the sort of same thing. He's storing everybody's value until they take it out. But I'm going one step further, because I transfer it on at, it takes under a second. I receive Lightning, I pay Hive. I don't hold the funds for more than a second. And once they've been transferred to a Hive account, that's yours. You've got the keys. You can do whatever you want with it. And I'm not saying, I didn't get into a fight. A whole load of Bitcoin maxis attacked me last week and attacked Adam. Actually, the worst part is they went to Adam and they said, why are you messing around with this Hive PodPing thing? You can do it all with Bitcoin, and you can't. You can't do PodPing with Ethereum or with Bitcoin. Can't be done. I'll stand by that. And my answer to all of them was, write the code. You do it. Okay. PodPing's been running for 9 months. Write the code. If you think you can do better with your system, write the code. None of them can write the code. And Lightning for these micropayments, I think is working really nicely. But if you want to make a 10 sat payment and 1 sat goes in fees, that's significant. Hive, all transactions are free. I can send 0.001 Hive, which is 1/10 of a cent. That's the smallest unit. No fee. I can send that 0.001 transaction backwards and forwards to myself as many times as I like. You need some resources, but it's unmeasurable. So Hive offers many advantages. And again, because it is actually a proper blockchain system, your value is there. It's not on your wallet. It's not on your Umbral node. It is in the records of the blockchain somewhere else. You just access it with keys. I'm not trying to, even last weekend, Adam said, how do I buy Hive? I'm not interested in I'm not trying to shill or say Hive is the answer to everything. It isn't. But like this mentality of calling everything a shit coin, that it just reflects poorly on the imagination of the people who do that all the time. Because what they can't do is they can't say, hey, this is a piece of technology, blockchain. This is a way of working which the world didn't really know about until 2009. What else can we do with it? What can we do with it beyond Bitcoin, beyond the way Lightning works? What can we do with it? And have the imagination, guys. Don't just call everything that isn't your system shitcoiners. That's why I don't think Hive people come to it with the mentality that Hive is the only system that's ever going to be built like this.
Yeah. It's funny seeing the psychology and the I don't know what you'd call it. It's almost like the ebbing and flowing of people's mentality, where, you know, maybe they got kicked out of a centralized system, they find a decentralized one, and now they're trying to centralize it by making it the only one because it's more valuable to them, etc., etc. Yeah, it's funny seeing that. Agreed. The last, I suppose, crypto thing that you're really involved in, I'm sure you're involved in lots of other things, was the crypto class action. And
yeah,
so basically, you mentioned before that you something about suing Facebook, and like that no one really does it or couldn't be done or something. Yet here you are. You're so for general context, I think it's basically Facebook, Twitter, and Google, I believe those three shut down all crypto advertising for a period in what year was it?
Okay, it went like this. In January, at the end of January 2018, Facebook said, this whole crypto thing, it's frequently associated with misleading and deceptive practices. We're just going to ban it from all of our systems. We're not going to take any adverts for any crypto-related business, not hardware, not wallets, not exchanges, nothing, no advertising. If you mention crypto, ban. That's what they did. Google did the same a few weeks later. Twitter did the same a few weeks after them. And pretty much everything followed. LinkedIn, the Chinese networks. By the end of almost mid 2018, there was almost no legitimate way to advertise a crypto business online in the world. I mean, it was as serious as that. And what crypto actually responded with was that everybody kind of went off to their own little YouTube channels, which was still allowed sort of, but got banned every now and then. And they went off to mailing lists, and they developed actually quite a valuable alternate industry of advertising. But nobody quite realized how badly they'd been screwed over. They didn't, and the markets all crashed. And each time there was an announcement of a ban, there was this precipitous, massive drop. Now, there's always been drops and rises in crypto, but we did the maths, and the correlations between the announcements and the inactions of bans by Facebook, Google, and Twitter, it's like really stark. And then on the flip side, when they relaxed their bans, but they still haven't ended them completely, each time they relaxed their bans, prices went up again. Huge correlation.
Yeah. And so essentially you're part of you and it was one other guy, right?
It's me and my friend is he lives in Israel now, but he's Australian, and he was a lawyer, and he was specifically he cut his teeth on telecoms law. He went to work for one of the big the big telco. What's the government one that Telstra?
Telstra, yeah.
He went to work for Telstra in their competition law department, and this was sort of late 90s when the internet was just starting up. Okay, and the startup of the internet was really interesting because what you had this subversive technology that we now know has utterly destroyed the telephone business of 30 or 40 years ago, paying long distance rates to do this conversation, when my parents first moved from South Africa to England, they literally couldn't afford to phone South Africa. You know, they would phone for 1 minute a week, maybe. Whereas now we're on a Zoom call to Australia and there's no cost. That wiped out a whole business of telephone industry. And so what happens was, as at that time, they would you know, the like Britain and Australia, they had this government monopoly, you know, the post office, that became the telephone company. And they had to work out, how can we not be a monopoly anymore? But we own all these wires in the ground that everybody wants to use. So how do we allow competition on our wires, but we've still got this central company that still needs to run all the exchanges? And they came up with all these rules, and they came up with these cartel rules that said you just couldn't restrict the supply of an essential product or service. So you can't say to this internet startup, oh, you're going to replace, you know, you can't go to Skype and say, we're not going to allow your traffic because it's going to destroy our business in 10 years. Actually, they weren't even smart enough to see it coming. But the law was in place to say they don't get to pick and choose who their customers were. And this cartel law in Australia is essentially still the same. And my friend, he had got into crypto mining in Israel, doing Ethereum and Monero and various other bits and bobs in late 2017. And then what happened with the price crash in 2018, in January, when Facebook announced this ban, was that all of the machines he had bought, the Ethereum mining and the graphics cards and stuff, suddenly they were not producing any economic value. And he was economically damaged. And he'd also started up a crypto consulting company. He's a lawyer. He was going to do crypto consulting. His wife's an accountant. They were going to do, and they'd sent out proposals and they'd had talks with clients. But suddenly everybody in crypto was like unable to get new customers because they couldn't advertise. The whole market just shrank. And he looked at the laws that he had been working with at Telstra, and he said, this is a cartel. What we've got here is that the world's largest providers of online advertising, and advertising is a very interesting product to sell to people, okay? Because it has become an essential part of business. It's like, unless you're just like a mom and pop store in a high street, and you've got your shop window and you rely on people walking past and seeing a window, how else do you get new customers in this world? Everything is advertising, and online advertising is the number one part of that. And so when you take an entire industry and you say, this industry, aside from the defamatory aspect of saying all of crypto is a scam, which is what Facebook did, aside from that, they just banned the whole industry. These companies were not clever enough to work out methods to, you know, to devote some of their billions to saying, okay, no, you're a scam, you're not a scam. It's like they couldn't put the effort in, ban it all. And that was a cartel. So we've brought a cartel action. At first, we're suing, we had Twitter on the papers, we took them off because they're too small, actually. We're suing just Facebook and Google. $600 billion is the headline figure, because we're in Australia law, we're allowed to sue on behalf of the whole world for an infringement that happened in the whole world, but took place in Australia
particularly
as well.
in Australia. Yeah, that's really interesting that that Australia, that you like picked Australia in essence, and that you can use Australia as sort of a battering ram to
and this has happened before. This has, like, for example, there's a very famous there was a class action case about air freight where prices were fixed, Malaysia Air and a Singapore Air and a bunch of sort of across the whole of the Far East. There was a price fixing cartel over the cost of air freight, and a class action was brought in Australia that, in fact, tangentially, I do a lot of air freight, and we got notifications from our freight forwarder here in Israel that you might be eligible for a payout based on this class action in Australia if you had ever used air freight across the Far East in sort of a 20-year period. Australia, And the other thing about Australia is, I think there's you still have a kind of a fairness thing. And when you start pointing out how unfair this ban was, and the court so far it's taken a long time, but we've explained it to a judge, and we're waiting on a judgment now that actually is just the judgment to allow us to serve Facebook and Google. It's complicated because when you sue an overseas company, and we're not suing Ireland or anything, we're suing Facebook and Google in America, but in the Australian courts. So we have to have permission to do that. And getting to this permission it's been a long trek, but we're any day now we could get a judgment that says we can do that. The courts in Australia seem relatively independent of the government. And the other thing is, Facebook and Google have spent no money lobbying. They're not popular even with the government or with the courts. They keep losing. The Australian government is suing Facebook over the Cambridge Analytica stuff, and they're suing Google over something else. There's lawsuits galore against them, and they're not popular. Because what do they do? What is Facebook's industry in Australia? They set up shop. They have a few dozens of people, mostly lawyers and some marketing people, and they just siphon vast amounts of money out of Australia. They've destroyed your local journalism. Google too. All they do is they have a big freaking funnel, and you pour money into them for businesses in your country to advertise on them. And the money just gets shipped straight to Ireland and then back to America. That's what they do. They don't employ people. They don't do development work. They contribute nothing to your economy. They're leeches.
Yeah,
and so I don't think they're not popular.
Yeah, the fairness aspect was a funny one, because we have a saying here, tall poppy syndrome, which is it's sort of reference to like when a poppy gets too tall above the rest of the crowd, it gets wiped off, which is somewhat, it can be a hit or miss type of thing. Like it could probably stifle innovation, because if you want someone doing something extraordinary, well, they're going to behave differently. So there is that. But then yes, there is also the I suppose like more fairness in the sense of everyone gets should get an equal say or an equal chance to make it in this world, I guess, to do what they want. So it is quite fascinating. So you're saying you're sort of just waiting on the ability to be able to sue them. So the judgment saying yes, you can now sue them. So if that goes through, how long would that process take to do all of that? Well,
what actually happened was that we had one judge. We went through quite a few. At first, you see, this is what's so crazy about our cases. At first, we thought we were going to need to raise a ton of money, and my friend would have to hire a barrister to represent our case in Australia. And my friend is a kind of unique person because he understands that he's running a HIVE witness node in his bedroom. And he used to run Ethereum miners, but he's also a very, very good lawyer. So he's unique. Only he could argue this case in front of a judge. You have to have a very special mindset to do both of those. So we filed the case in a bit of a hurry because they changed some rules about funding of class actions. Anyway, we wanted to get in court. Suddenly, we'd been building and building and building. We raised almost no money, but we had 700 odd people sign up with damages of $100 million. But we got the thing into court before a certain date in 2020. And COVID had hit, so we could do everything remotely, which actually helped us tremendously.
Yeah,
because he thought he was going to be flying all the time to Australia. Turns out all of the court system shifted to Microsoft Teams, which just, apart from getting up at 2 a.m, so we get this, we file these documents, we get this court date with a very old, very respected judge, and we go to the first hearing, and all he saw in his docket was self-representing plaintiff, which is usually a catastrophic thing. I think there's a very famous film that he made me watch, an Australian film about some guy who fights some land dispute. I can't remember. It's some like iconic old Australian movie. Anyway, self-representing plaintiff is the lowest of the low. You know, that's usually like some poor Thai maid that can't afford to hire a lawyer in an immigration case. That anyway, but my friend he's really good. He's really, really good. So we show up to this first hearing and the judge is like, you know, what's this nonsense? How can you sue the biggest companies in the world?
Was he asking what is crypto as well?
No, he wasn't quite that. He wasn't even prepared to do the substance of that first hearing was just 15 minutes. But he pushed back on the part of law, and my friend just hit him with both barrels. You know, our documents are really good. And my friend hit him with knowing everything. And suddenly he was forced to take us seriously. And we went through 3 or 4 more hearings with this guy, but then he was too busy, and we've been handed over to a much younger, newer judge who actually only went onto the bench mid last year. And we're waiting for her decision now. But we went through rounds with him taking us more and more seriously and asking very good questions, and us being allowed to amend our documents and put in an amended statement of claim to answer his questions and so on. And the process helped us because, again, this is weird. We're what's called ex parte. The other side is not in the court. We are getting judge time. And this is just the way the system works. It's not unfair or wrong. And with the current judge, you know, we had 3 different sessions amounting to, I don't know, 5 or 6 hours in front of her, where my friend went through the whole case, start to finish, all of our evidence. And our evidence is mostly their own papers. It actually rests on them. The Australian law is quite funny in this. To prove a cartel, what you have to do, it's not just a cartel, it's that you wrote into your contract what's called cartel conditions. And Facebook, Google, all of them actually, they don't really have different contracts for whether you advertise or whether you're just a simple user. They've just got one, you know, the terms and conditions, accept, you know, that we all clicked. They put the ban on advertising in their standard terms and conditions, which technically means under Australian law, each time anyone anywhere in the world clicked accept, that was another example of a cartel condition, an illegal contract under the cartel rules. And each one is a separate infringement. Billions, literally billions. It's the largest. It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous to think of. But from our point of view, we're talking about banning people. We're talking about people who couldn't click accept. We're not allowed to click accept. That's the infringement. We've refined our case, and it's all worked. And in the meantime, actually, what's happened? The Australian government's helped us. They don't know it, but they've been suing Google and Facebook. So the first thing Facebook said was, "Oh, you can't sue us in Australia. You can only sue us in America because of our standard terms and conditions, which say that." And the Australian government went through months to get eventually, and they've just had a ruling from the High Court, a 3-judge ruling from the highest Supreme Court in Australia saying, yeah, actually, no, the Australian government and anyone can sue Facebook in Australia if they want to, and if you're talking about a matter of real Australian law. And that ruling immediately went into our court documents because, thank you very much, it's just when we serve Facebook, they won't find a barrister in Australia who will come back and tell them it's a good idea to try and resist this and move it to California, because they've already fought that battle and lost. So it's funny how, you know, things line up. COVID, as horrible as it's been, COVID allowed the case to be brought in its current form.
Do you feel the case itself, is it about the money? Or is it more about the precedent? Is it about the, you know?
Our dream would be to get a massive cash award, which we then hand out in crypto. So we get billions of dollars from Facebook and Google. And the first thing we have to do is buy a shit ton of Bitcoin and drive the price of Bitcoin up to then give Bitcoin to people, because that's how we would distribute the money.
Yeah.
neither of us would allow anybody to claim except via crypto. Send us a wallet, we'll send you the money. And in fact, bizarre, there's all sorts of stuff behind the scenes to weigh. Australia's got some amazing laws for this. I don't think they haven't thought them through into the crypto industry, so they're quite friendly at the moment. We'll see. That's why we wanted to file quickly. But yeah, obviously, we would make some money because we're doing this all contingency. I mean, like, nobody pays me to do this. Andrew and I have raised a tiny amount of money, but it's our time. But the joy of this, once we realized we didn't have to hire barristers and stuff, because we spent 70,000 Australian dollars getting advice from a barrister. In the end, it was hopeless because it was going to cost us 100,000 Australian dollars just to explain the case to him. We wound up filing the case in court for $500, and now we've explained the case to a lawyer, and what we hope, we don't know what it's going to be, but her answer is going to be like the barrister's advice we didn't pay for. We know our case. Andrew knows his case. We'll see. Let the judge tell us, is it a good case or not?
That's really cool. It's funny just I suppose seeing how crypto is affecting like the real life, and it's like going on all around. There's court cases going around, PodPing's being sent, Satoshi's being moved, podcasting advancing. It's really this is what I was promised in 2017, and it's coming to fruition, which is really nice to see.
Well, that I'm hopeful that we will, even if we don't win anything ultimately, we're doing this to show that these companies just can't act with impunity. Give them a bloody nose at least, but I actually think we've got a case. We've got a real case. And the thing is, what's changed in the intervening 2 years since we put this into court is that, they're now on, Facebook and Google are under some massive pressure in America. But America doesn't have the anti-cartel laws that Australia has. Australia's laws are really good. They're just good. They're good for the little guy. They stop ganging up. And this business of blocking an entire industry, how can that be allowed? Once you look at Google and Facebook as 80% of online advertising, which they are in some markets, how can they decide, no, your whole industry is illegitimate? And I think this has implications for guns and for certain other industries that are legal in some places. But Facebook and Google just say, no. It's like, I don't think those companies actually should be able to censor anything that isn't illegal. If a government wants to pass a law and say, this is illegal, pass the law, then the companies can work around that. But they're so big and they have so much power and they wield it so irresponsibly and dangerously, we have to try and peg them in a bit. But I don't want them to be replaced. I want them to be destroyed, and I do not want another global social network to ever exist. I do not want HIVE to be the world's global social network. I want there to be lots and lots of places where discussions and people and communities get together like we did in the early days around bulletin boards and so on. I think that this global social network thing has been a globally bad idea. I just think I don't want one.
Yeah, well, it doesn't seem to be getting stronger and if anything weakening. I think Facebook had its first month or something like that where they had less users than previously.
They're not growing.
Yeah, which makes sense. There's only so much of the world you can capture. Brian, thanks for coming on and sort of like informing me and informing the listeners all about this, man. It was it's fascinating, and like I was saying, it's awesome seeing all this stuff happening and that you're part of it, and you're writing the code, you're waking up at 2 a.m. to do the court cases and things like that. That's it's really awesome to see, man. And it's I just have to commend you for it. It's been so fun jumping into podcasting 2.0 into crypto world, and yeah, you're doing some awesome work. So really do appreciate it, just personally, for that.
Thank you. And
yeah, if anyone wants to find out more about what you're up to and whatnot, where's the best place to go?
well, my core home, I like to say, is it's Hive, hive.blog/@Brian of London. But you can find me on Twitter @Brian of London. That leads to Hive very often, and Telegram. Basically, if you find Brian of London online, other than a hairdresser in Texas, and it's a long story with taken by surprise by a lesbian as to why I'm Brian of London, but other than the Texas hairdresser, most of the other Brian of London online is me, and you'll see my little avatar is it's a cartoon drawn by a guy called Bosch Faustin. Look him up.
Yeah, it'll be the thumbnail for this, so yeah, people can see that easily. Yeah,
that's an original piece of artwork that I commissioned by
Make it an NFT.
An original artist. It's an NFT, but
awesome. Thanks so much, man. And yeah, we'll chat again soon and do this when there's some more updates, I suppose.